Hello, my name is Jill Hamilton Bunch, and I'm the Associate Dean here in the School of Ed at Point Loma Nazarene University. And we're excited to have you on board as a university supervisor. We're going to take just a few minutes to familiarize you with the process of supervising as you supervise your candidates in the field. We refer to our candidates as candidates, and we refer to their students as students. So you'll hear me use the term candidate throughout this video, and that is referring to our students who are enrolled here at Point Loma. So you will have a candidate who you are supervising for clinical practice, or you may have a candidate who you are supervising as an intern coach. So I'm going to start with clinical practice. That's what most of our candidates are enrolled in as you serve them as a university supervisor. So the first thing we want to let you know is that all resources are located at www.plnuclinicalpractice.com. So that's plnuclinicalpractice.com. And you're just going to click on your regional center, whether that's Mission Valley or Bakersfield, and you're going to click on the tab that says University Supervisors. And all of the forms and the information that I'm going to be talking about are all located there on the website under the tab for University Supervisors underneath Mission Valley or Bakersfield. What we'd like you to do before you begin this video is to download the Clinical Practice Handbook, which you'll find there, and that's what I'm going to be reviewing through the lens of your role as a clinical practice supervisor. You can also view the video for master teachers and mentor teachers in another section of this site if you'd like to review that as well, so you can see what the master teachers are viewing, or you can just review this video for university supervisors. So now that you have your clinical practice handbook downloaded, you'll probably want to print this, or you can use it electronically, whatever is the easiest for you. We want to just go over very quickly your role as the university supervisor. So as you begin, there is general information that talks about the California standards for the teaching profession, and also what we call the teacher performance expectations. And the teacher performance expectations are what the California standards for the teaching profession are called while students are earning their credential. So those are the first few pages that you're going to see in the clinical practice handbook. And then you're going to get into required daily hours, information such as when students are going to be observed. And there's a really helpful timeline for clinical practice, and it's called Clinical Practice Suggested Timeline, and that's for traditional candidates. And that will help the candidate know how to phase into student teaching or into teaching as they're in a classroom co-teaching with the master teacher. So let me just start with the required daily hours. Candidates are asked to be on campus when their teacher is on campus. When they're recording their hours in the daily log, which you'll find in the forms section, they are only counting those hours that they are in with students in student contact. So for example, if they're at a professional development day, that does not count as student contact time. If they're in a meeting, that does not count as student contact time. So the hours that they're recording are those hours where they're actually in a classroom with students or in an official setting with students. So for example, if they're helping to run an after-school program where they're providing instruction after the school day, but it's a structured program, they can count that as part of their hours. So even though they're on campus for, let's say, 6.5 hours, they wouldn't be able to record 6.5 hours in their daily log. Their daily log is only for those hours that are student contact hours. So please remind them of that as they're filling out their daily log. Right above that, you're going to see something that says PLNU versus school calendar. And what that means is that our candidates are following the school where they are placed. They're following that school's calendar rather than following Point Loma's calendar. So they'll be attending seminar along with clinical practice. It's a class in the evening, but they are to follow the school's calendar. So if the school is in session, when we're not in session, they need to be at the school. So if they have a class with us, they need to attend the class as they are enrolled. but their time at the school needs to be when the school is in session, they are in session at the school. You'll also see right below that daily required hours what they do if they have an absence. So if they have an absence, they need to report that to the master teacher as soon as possible. They need to report that to the field experience coordinator at either Mission Valley or Bakersfield. And then they also need to let you know. If they miss 3 days within a single quad or within a single clinical practice experience, we call them CP1 and CP2. If they miss more than 3 days or more of CP1 or CP2, we ask that they stay for another week in that placement. So if you have a student who has to miss 3 days, that's fine as long as it's approved by you and by the university. But they will need another week of clinical practice, and that's located in the handbook for their information as well. So probably the most important piece is that they need to report those absences to you, to the school, and also to the university. As I said, the suggested timeline is there at the beginning for you, and that helps the students know what they're going to be expected to do in week 1, in week 2. It also shows them what they'll be turning in during each week, and that's in the far right-hand column. So pay close attention to that suggested timeline in the handbook. Then the next section reviews teacher performance assessments. There are 2 teacher performance assessments, Cycle 1 and Cycle 2. Cycle 1 is completed in CP1 and Cycle 2 is completed in CP2. There is another informational video about the TPAs that is specific to those 2 TPAs. Just some general information about the TPAs. They are submitted through Pearson. They submit those through a website. They have already paid for those assessments with fees, so we give them a voucher that they use to pay for that on the Pearson website, because they've already paid us for that TPA. They submit those TPAs in week 7 of clinical practice for both CP1 and CP2. And probably the most important thing that they need to know is they will be videotaping 1 lesson for task 1 and a series of lessons for task 2, or cycle 2. We call them tasks. That's a former name, so sometimes you'll hear me say task. That's now known as cycle. So cycle 1 and cycle 2. So they will be videotaping for both experiences. So you may be asked as a university supervisor to tape for them, and that is perfectly fine and acceptable for you to do. If there is ever a problem right after that TPA section, that teacher performance assessment section, there's a notification of the need to improve. And that is something that we submit if a candidate is having struggles, and we usually want to complete that about week 3 or 4 of the experience. So if there is a notification of a need to improve, the person whom you contact is the field experience coordinator on your campus. And that person will help walk you through the process of building a notification to improve. As part of that improvement plan, we give them extra support. We may lengthen their experience. There are lots of different options that we have to help them with that improvement plan. Then the next section you'll see is information about professionalism, dress code, their video recording. There's a section about the responsibilities of the teacher candidate. There is, again, that suggested timeline, and then you'll see the assessments that they have and what they need to be storing in the binder. And I'm going to just take a moment and talk about the binder. The purpose of the binder is so that you're checking for daily lesson plans and you're checking for information that they're completing while you're not in the classroom. We're going to be moving to partially using a video taping system that will be part of our observations, but you would still have them turning in their binder every time that they're sending you a videotape. So even in that new system, we would like you to be collecting that binder every time you visit the student, whether that's virtually or in person. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. So in their binder, and I'm just looking at the assessment of candidate performance in the handbook, it's right after the suggested timeline for the teacher candidate. They always need to be keeping their clinical practice log. So they need to be keeping up with that clinical practice log every week. So every time you visit, you want to be checking to make sure that that is being filled out properly. If they're a traditional candidate, they're also receiving from their master teacher a clinical practice weekly progress report. And that's just, were they on time, were they professional, making sure that they were doing those things that they needed to do in the week, rather than waiting until the end to talk about any issues that may be occurring. They also need to be using the daily instructional plan for one lesson every day that they're in the classroom. So every day that they're at clinical practice, they need one lesson plan. If they would like to use the school's lesson plan, so sometimes the master teacher has a school lesson plan template, or if you have interns who are in clinical practice, they'd like to use their school's lesson plan template, they may do that with approval from the associate dean. So if the candidate would like to use their daily instructional plan, you're going to give that information to your field experience coordinator, who will send that on to me as the associate dean, and I will approve that if it has the elements of the PLNU instructional plan. And that needs to be done within the first week that they're in the classroom. So we're only approving an alternative daily plan the first week of their placement. So please make sure they've done that within the first week of the placement so that they can begin to use that alternative plan if approved. The formal lesson plans, you're going to be visiting your candidate 5 times in 8 weeks. So the design is that you're there every other week, and 2 of those visits will only be a week apart. We do not want you to go more than a week without seeing your candidate. So if you see them in week 1, you would see them again in week 3, week 5, week 7, and then perhaps week 8. So 2 of those visits are going to be a little closer together, but we ask that you never go more than a full week without seeing them. The purpose of that is that we need to see growth over time. What we cannot do is visit them, for example, twice on one day. So we're going to watch 2 lessons in a row and count those as 2 observations, because the idea is that we're going to conference with them, reflect with them, and that will show growth over time. The candidate, and again, this is all printed in the handbook, but just for your information as you're reading, they should be submitting that daily lesson plan to you the formal lesson plan to you electronically 24 hours before your visit. So if you're visiting at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, you should have that at 10 a.m. on Monday electronically on the PLNU formal lesson plan. And that's the Universal Design for Learning plan, and that's located at the PLNU clinical practice website where you're viewing this video. So please make sure that they're using the formal PLNU lesson plan for those 5 visits. You can either have them reflect on that lesson plan prior to you conferencing with them, or you can have conference with them and then have them reflect. That order is up to you. While you're observing, you are filling out and taking notes in the formative assessment. So there's a formative assessment guide. It has the TPEs within it. And on the left-hand side, you're taking notes on what you've reviewed. And on the right-hand side, you're giving them notes and next steps. You'll see a sample of that right below this video. So if you'd like to see a sample of what those look like completed, you can click on that link and it will show you some samples of those completed formative assessments. And again, you can either conference with your students and show them the formative assessment and then have them do the reflection, or you can have them do the reflection and then conference. That's up to you. And you may want to do a couple one way and a couple the other. So that's a total of 5 formal visits within the time that they're in CP1 or in CP2. And you're filling out the formative assessment while you're in the room. Then you're conferencing with the student, And then the student is filling out the analysis and reflection conference guide. And that's their reflection on their lesson and their reflection on what they've talked about with a cooperating teacher, as well as what they've talked about with you. There will also be 3 assessments that come to you via your email, and these assessments are surveys. So these go into TaskStream. They are official. When you click submit, they are submitted right into TaskStream, which is our data gathering system for that candidate. So before you fill those out, or after you fill them out, but before you hit submit, you do need to print that, because that's the only way the candidate can actually see that form, because it does go right into TaskStream for university and CTC information. So what that means is you'll have a pre-assessment that comes at the beginning of the experience, and that is only going to be for traditional candidates. So our intern candidates do not have a pre-assessment. And then a midterm assessment will come in the middle of the experience, and then the final assessment will come at the end. And we are checking in TaskStream to make sure that all 3 of those are submitted before you submit a grade. So please make sure you've submitted all 3 of those before you give your candidate a credit at the end of the assessment. The other piece of that midterm and final assessment is that the cooperating teacher is receiving the same survey. So the cooperating teacher, the master teacher, is receiving the same survey those 3 times that you're receiving as a university supervisor. And then you'll also get a survey at the end for dispositions, and that is whether the candidate was trustworthy, whether they went the extra mile. Those dispositions are also listed in this handbook, and you're going to be filling that out by survey at the end of the experience, and the cooperating teacher, mentor teacher, will be doing that as well. All of the reflections, the formal lesson plans, the daily lesson plans, and the log, as well as the conference guides, will be submitted through TaskStream by the candidate. So you're going to receive an email that says that the candidate has submitted those things, and you'll be going into TaskStream and clicking that they have submitted those things. And I'm going to show you where to find that list of what they'll be submitting, and that's also helpful for the candidate to know exactly what they'll be submitting. And then at the very end, the candidate does a quick reflection on their time with you, as well as their time with the master teacher. We also ask that you do a quick reflection on the master teacher as well. That helps us to know if the cooperating teacher was a good fit for Point Loma. Then moving into the next section, there's a section called Cooperating Teacher, and that is for the cooperating teacher. And if cooperating teachers have questions, remember that this handbook is there for them as well, and they're also doing a training. The University Supervisor is the next section, and that talks about you, and it gives you a really specific list of your responsibilities, and it also gives you a timeline, what you should do week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. So that's a good timeline to follow. And then on the next section is a section called Forms. And what's really helpful in this section is that it gives you a list of what should be in the binder. So the candidates have a pre-made binder that we give them. So they'll have that binder for you to check each time you're there. Making sure that you're checking each time. There's a little check-off sheet to show that you've checked it. Just put a little check there and put the date that you checked it off. In that binder checklist, an asterisk is listed next to everything that the candidate needs to turn in. So if they're curious what they need to turn in at the end, anything with an asterisk. So I'm going to go through that very quickly. That's the clinical practice log, their weekly reflections, only if they're traditional, and that's completed by the cooperating teacher. Their daily plans as one document, so they just scan those all in as one document. Then the formal and midterm and pre-assessment has been sent by survey, so they won't have to submit that. And then the formative assessment would be your assessment, their lesson plan, and then a reflection. And they're going to turn in 5 of those. What I like about that section is it has a little date, so that helps the candidate see whether they've turned in the information from that date. So for example, they're going to send that analysis and reflection conference guide to you, and the next time you are in their classroom, you're going to check off that you've received that. So at the end, they'll have everything that they need. They won't have to produce anything to turn in. The clinical practice log is right behind that, and in the top right-hand corner of the clinical practice handbook, you're going to see in red who fills that out and who submits it. So that's just a handy guide for you. And then there's some information about co-teaching. This is for the master teacher and the candidate to use for co-planning and co-teaching. And then the instructional plans are there in the form section. And then the last thing you're going to see is for single subject candidates only. So for our single subject candidates, and it's after the lesson plan rubric and all of the lesson plans, you're going to see some rubrics that just say the name of subject matter. So I'm turning to that page in my notebook. And so again, you're going to see all of those evaluations there and rubrics that go with them. And this is going to be towards the back after all of the pre-assessment. All of those assessments are here for you, so you can see what you're going to be filling out when you get that email with the survey. So in the very back of the handbook, you're going to see something called single subject competency rubrics. For those of you who are supervising single subject candidates, our candidates have to show that they have completed competency in each area of their subject matter. So for example, in English, they have to show that they've taught writing, that they've taught grammar, that they've taught story structure in response to literature. So there's a rubric for English teachers. There's a rubric for science, math, business, PE. There's all the different subjects there. So CTC has told us these are the things that our students need to know in order to be able to teach single subject. They need to have every area completed by the end of CP2. So if you are CP1 University Supervisor, you're going to use that rubric and you're just going to check off those things, and you're going to do that by hand and just check those off, those things that the candidate has already covered. And the candidate is going to submit that in addition to all the other paper that they submit for CP1. They're going to submit that for CP1. Then the next supervisor, the candidate has that checkoff sheet, that list of competencies for single subject. They're going to give their second supervisor that filled out rubric from the first supervisor, and then you're only going to ask to observe those specific things that they haven't yet completed in CP1. So let's say, as with my student teacher, I'm with her for CP1, and she's completed all of the competencies on the single subject rubric except for one. That would mean I would still do my 5 visits with her in CP2, or the next supervisor would. But I would also say one of those lessons has to be focused on grammar, because that is the one competency that she hasn't completed in CP1. So I'm just going to say that again. This is only for single subject supervisors, and this is called the single subject competency rubric, and it's in the single subject that you're observing. In order to be a university supervisor for a single subject, you either have to have an administrative credential or you must have a single subject credential in that area. So if you are a single subject English teacher, you would not be able to observe someone who is teaching math. So you should have a full knowledge of that single subject, so you'll feel comfortable checking off those competencies as your candidate is completing those. If you have any questions about those, please or any other question, please contact your field experience coordinator. They're happy to help you. If they don't have the answer, they'll get you to someone who does. So that is a clinical practice. One of the most important things we want to remind you is that clinical practice is both supportive and evaluative. So you are evaluating and certifying that this candidate is ready to be in their own classroom at the end of CP2. So it is very important that you let them know you are not just supporting them, you're also evaluating and certifying that this candidate is ready to be in the field in their own classroom. If you are an intern coach, then things change quite a bit. It is 4 visits instead of 8 visits. So you're visiting every other week, and you cannot skip a week again because by law, we have to be in classrooms every other week. There will also be a school coach who will be working with you. And in intern coaching, it is strictly supportive. You're not evaluating, you're supporting. The candidate still must do daily lesson plans, and they must do a formal lesson plan 4 times. You still fill out the formative form, and they fill out the conference and analysis. So let's talk about what the intern candidate does not fill out. They do not fill out the hours log, the weekly progress report, or the midterm final and the pre-assessment. You won't be receiving those either. So for the intern candidate, they're going to be doing formal lesson plan, the reflection, and you're going to be filling out the formative plan with them, as well as daily lesson plans. So instead of 5 things they turn into test stream, they're going to turn in 4. And again, coaching is all about support, and clinical practice is support as well as evaluation. As with all things at Point Loma, we're really glad you're here and so glad that you're on the team. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. There is another video that goes into more detail about the teacher performance assessments, as well as video assessment for those times when candidates are being observed through that method. Thank you for being on the team, and we look forward to you having a great experience in clinical practice or intern coaching.